Tatas.com.
This is the morning brief from the Economic Times.
A long-standing corporate partnership which disintegrated into an all-out legal battle is now entering yet another interesting phase. At stake is the seamless functioning and ownership of one of India's largest conglomerates. The Tata Group and the Shapoorji-Pallonji Group, which owns an 18% equity holding in Tata Sons, now potentially have the opportunity to bury their recent tumultuous history. Can they reach an amicable resolution? That's the question we are exploring today. From the Economic Times, I'm Sudhijit and this is the Morning Brief. On the sidelines of court proceedings over whether or not the SP Group can pledge their Tata Sons shares, the Tatas have offered to buy back their shares. And the SP Group has said it is happy to do the transaction as well. The question now will be, what is the valuation at which the buyback can happen? The Shapoorji-Pallonji Group, or the SP Group, is expecting 1.8 lakh crore rupees or 1.8 trillion rupees for their holding, for their 18% holding. To state the obvious, that's a vast sum of money. Any resolution could potentially trigger changes at the 152-year-old Tata Group, which has always been privately owned and held by a group of charitable trusts. We might see new investors coming in to take SP Group's place. We could see an entirely different corporate structure. We could also, just as well, see the two sides getting into a long and bruising battle over the valuation. Today, we are joined by my colleagues Arijit Barman and Devina Sengupta, who have covered the Tata-SP battle since 2016, when SP Group's scion Cyrus Mistry was unceremoniously ousted as executive chairman of the Tata Group in what, of course, became one of the most high-profile and bruising corporate battles in recent history. Arijit and Devina, thanks so much for joining us today. Arijit, let me come to you first. What are the likely scenarios now? Are we likely to see a lot of wrangling over the valuation of SP's stock holding as well as the Tata brand?
Morning, SK. Thanks for having us over. Yes, I do believe that we're going to see a round two, or perhaps you can call it round three, of a legal and PR battle. As you know, you've announced the divorce, but what about the alimony? Because that's where the buck stops. Already, there is a huge difference between what the Tatas think is the fair value of the 80-odd% that the Mistry family owns in Tata Sons and what the Mistrys think is the correct value. If I can give you the numbers, as per the Mistrys maths, they peg their 18-odd% stakes worth to be around 1.78 lakh crore. Tatas, on the other hand, they are relying on a 2016 valuation exercise that was done by a very renowned chartered accountant, Mr. Y.H. Mulligam. And as per that valuation, the number should be estimated at about just a third, which is around 57 to 58,000 crore. So there is a significant difference between the two sets of numbers. Now, remember, there's a reason, why this wrangling could continue, even though the relations between the two men, Ratan Tata, the patriarch of the group, and Cyrus, has certainly gone far beyond repair. Now, the problem that Mistry is facing is that Cyrus Mistry's family's main business is construction. Okay, they've built the Reserve Bank of India's Mumbai headquarters. They have built the Sultan of Oman's palace, but for the last 1.5 years, India's shadow banking crisis has left the Shapoorji-Pallonji Group parched for liquidity. So at this juncture, the ability to realize the full value of its stored wealth would really help the family tide over the liquidity crisis. Now, Tata's, on the other hand, yes, they're far better off. It's almost $112 billion conglomerate with over 100 group companies, many listed, many unlisted. But several key companies are also facing massive headwinds. Tata Motors, Tata Steel, their power business, other than Tata TCS, which is literally like the ATM for the group.
TCS and
Yes.
Right.
They are not in the pink of health. In fact, in some cases, the net debt of some of the largest companies in Tata Group is now
Mhm.
higher than their market capitalization. So there is trouble on both sides with varying degrees, but certainly the mysteries need full value. So I think that we should expect this wrangling to continue for a bit more.
And what are the available remedies to either side? I mean, this is sort of an offer they're making each other outside of the court process, right? Now, if they can't agree on a valuation, if they can't find a common ground, what happens?
This is not the first time that people will be bickering over valuations. All divorces are messy. If they can't agree on a consensus, then they would get an independent or a well respected, maybe a retired Supreme Court judge, maybe someone that both sides trust,
Hmm.
because this, an earlier resolution, is beneficial for both sides.
Absolutely. Can you talk a little bit about one of the key issues in the middle of all of this, which is the imprecise science of valuing a brand, right? A lot of your tangible assets, there can be some degree of differences in valuation by multiple parties, but you can really value tangible assets, factories, infrastructure, vehicles, so on and so forth, right? But the value of a brand is one where there can be widely varying estimates of what really is a brand value. And when it comes to an iconic brand like the Tata, indeed, a lot of scope and a lot of room for differing perceptions. Can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, this imprecise science of valuing a brand?
Brands are intricately linked with the hygiene, the overall functioning of a group. Now, Tata's for long has been the most trusted brand of India. It's the most respected brand, it's the most well known brand around the world. Yes, Reliance would now argue that, thanks to the dollar deluge that we've seen, thanks to their telecom and now going to retail, there's a lot of excitement around the Reliance brand. But when it comes to trust, when it comes to legacy, history, the history of corporate India is intricately linked with that of the Tatas. And mind you, there has been. Tatas have a very definitive brand architecture in place. Group companies pay a royalty, and that formula is based on the revenue in each of the company. It's intricately done. I mean, group companies, joint ventures, associate companies, because we're talking about more than 100 companies in the ecosystem and it's growing, right? I mean, 10 years ago or 15 years ago, we didn't have Tata Starbucks, but now we have that, right? So,
Right.
and each one of them, a new venture, Tata Sky, relatively young business, Vistara, a new business. They're getting into healthcare. The moment you start using the Tata moniker, there is a payment mechanism in place. Since they have that in place, I would reckon that both sides would have done, their own math, their own calculations vis-a-vis the brand dynamic, the brand valuation. If again, just like the corporate valuation, if they can't agree, they will have to get an independent valuer, someone respected and accepted, more importantly, by both sides, to come to a final number.
I suppose it puts them in a something of an unenviable position because you have one party arguing, look, your brand is worth this much. And then it's in their interest to argue, well, you know what, it's not worth that much, it's worth less, which is not something any brand wants to argue, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because this has an impact on the overall health, overall. This will always remain a risk factor, this
Right.
protracted legal battle. Because, mind you, a lower court actually reinstated Cyrus Mistry as the chairman of Tata Sons last year, saying that his ousting was illegal. Now, that causes tremendous amount of uncertainty. Yes, the Tatas managed to get a stay. Subsequently, the matter moved to Supreme Court. But no investor, especially at a time like this, when there is enough macro and micro headwinds, would want this additional question mark hovering over your head. I mean, it just makes matters more messy and complicated.
Devina, now let me come to you and let's talk a little bit about telecom. One of the most challenging legacy businesses for Tata's was telecom. Could you take us through some of the ups and downs that business has seen and the role it played in the eventual fallout between Cyrus Mistry and Ratan Tata?
Right. Thank you for the question, SK. So, the telecom business for the Tata Group has been called as the Achilles heels by Cyrus Mistry before.
Mhm.
In many meetings before he got booted out, Mistry had categorically gone on record and said that this business needs to be removed from the Tata Group. It has been bleeding copiously, and there was also an affidavit presented in court in which he had mentioned that the sale of Tata Teleservices, which is the main telecom unit, meant that the Tata Group would have to make a write down of 26,000 crore. Now, the tussle between Ratan Tata and Cyrus Mistry did not just start as far as the telecom sector is concerned at the time of Mistry getting ousted from the Tata Group as the chairman.
Right.
It has been boiling for the last few years before that. So now you have to understand the news was already out in the market that a company called Reliance Jio will come and completely disrupt the telecom sector. Mistry had seen that, had noted that, and had brought the board's attention to it. There was also reports that the Tata Group was in discussion with Vodafone then for an alliance or for a buyout of the telecom unit, but that never worked out. Repeatedly, Mistry had told the Tata Sons and the Tata Group board that there needs to be a sale of the telecom unit because the telecom unit was a CDMA business, whereas Jio was coming up with 4G. Mistry was very aware that Tata Teleservices, as it was known then and as it had presented to its customers then, would not survive the onslaught once Jio comes in, and it would lead to further bleeding of the coffers and the subscribers. However, as it happens in almost all Tata companies, it is very difficult to let go of a business, and the telecom was one such business.
Right.
The other issue that happened between the two leaders was over Docomo. Docomo is a Japanese company which had a 26.5% stake in Tata Teleservices and came into India through this alliance in 2009 November. The partners, that is Tata's and Docomo, had agreed that if the Japanese company exited the venture within 5 years, it would be paid a minimum of 50% of the acquisition price. The 26.5% that time was around 12,700 crore. However, it just so happened that in 2014, Docomo decided to exit the business.
Mhm.
And then it said, as per the legal contract, you need to pay us, the Tatas need to pay them $1.2 billion arbitration award. Tatas refused. Cyrus Mistry, in an affidavit, had mentioned that Ratan Tata, in fact, wanted to sue Docomo for defamation. Because again, leaving Tata Group is obviously a massive impact on their brand.
Right.
Interestingly, right after the fallout happened between Mistry and Tata, and a London arbitration court had awarded that Tata Group was to pay the Japanese company $1.2 billion. An envoy was sent to Japan, and this whole challenge between the two companies, that is the Japanese firm and the Tata Group, was sorted out. And in 2017, the deal was settled, as in Tata's paid the settlement amount of $1.2 billion. Today, most of Tata Teleservices has been sold to Bharti Airtel in a cash-free, debt-free deal. Interestingly, this is exactly what Mistry had suggested in 2016-15, that you need to remove this Achilles heels from the business.
Right.
And this is exactly what the Tatas did, but after Mistry was removed.
Right.
So that gets you to question whether were all decisions of Mistry not followed, or were they followed, or were all decisions of Mistry wrong?
Right.
Because it just so happened that some of the calls that the Tata Group have done after Mistry's ouster has been exactly what Mistry had suggested while he was the chairman.
Right. And that certainly appears to be the case in telecom.
That certainly appears to be the case in telecom sector, right? Because exactly Jio had come in 2016. It did completely change the telecom sector. And today, Tata Teleservices in the CDMA business, or in the business that it had then existed, may not have survived.
Right. Arijit, let me come back to you now, which brings me to the question of, if they have to raise this kind of money, we're talking about very substantial sums, what instruments or mechanisms do you reckon they would use to find this amount to pay SP Group for the buyback?
See, it's a really big check, right? So we are looking at least anything from 14 to 20 billion, a kind of a number, right? Depending on whose side or whose maths you bank upon. Now,
That's right.
in the past, there was an exercise done. There were at least two or three banks, big, large global banks who came in, did an exercise for Tata Sons in terms of what's the valuation like, and if we have to actually buy the mysteries out and bury the hatchet and move on once and for all, who do we go to? Because as I said in the beginning, the Tata Group companies themselves are highly leveraged. Now, this buyback will be done not by the group companies, but by their holding company, Tata Sons. Now,
That's right.
before I progress, I want to just make our listeners understand that, how the Tata Group is structured. Now, Tata Sons is a closely held body which sits in control of this entire Tata Group and is 66% owned by Tata Trust. Now, these are charities run by Ratan Tata, who, as I said, is the group patriarch, and Mistries own 18% of Tata Sons. So 66% is controlled by Trust, and 18% of Tata Sons is owned by the Mistry family. This equity, it had its origin way back in 1925. Okay, how? It has its origin in an unpaid $200 million loan that the Tata family then took to save their then fledgling steel business. That's Tata Steel. So that's the group architecture. It's layered. Tata Sons that controls the Tata Group companies, and on top of Tata Sons is the various trusts. Now, there are other family members who own, small bits of Tata Sons. Now, as I just mentioned, that in 2015-16, Tata's did bring in some of the global banks to help them out brainstorm. And there were some sovereign wealth funds who were interested to bankroll this buyback if it ever had to happen. So I would expect that you would get sovereign wealth funds, very large family offices, and what we call in finance parlance long only private equity or insurance or pension investors. Long only means that they would want to hold on to this investment for long, number one. Sovereign wealth funds are entities like a Temasek, a GIC. Mind you, the Singaporeans are very, very, very friendly with Ratan Tata at a personal
Mm.
level. So are several of these, petro-rich funds from the Middle East, like Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, ADIA, like Kuwaitis, like, of course, Mohammed bin Salman, PIF, the poster boy of today's capitalism. So they are all very, very, very close to Ratan Tata for a lot of reasons. Mind you, Ratan Tata also owns a lot of marquee brands, Jaguar, Land Rover being one. Who doesn't want to ride a Jag, right? So he has access to global funds. He's also very, very close to a lot of old money from Europe, like the Agnelli family, the guys who
Right.
own Ferrari, right? And now
Right.
Fiat and other businesses. So I don't think raising money will be a problem.
Mhm.
They can also raise financing in terms of debt financing and other structured. If I'm a betting man, I would say I would go with sovereign wealth funds, some of the ultra high net worth individuals or families in Europe, and some of the pension funds who would love to, back them. Mind you, nobody would want another company to come in because that's always the fear. You wouldn't want, just give you a random example, a Reliance or an Adani's buy it from Mysteries because that will open up another can of worms, right? So, or another Pandora's box, actually. So, it's going to be financial investors, and also this is a illiquid instrument. Tata Sons is not listed, so anybody who is coming in should
Right.
also be wary of the fact that there is only one buyer for that 80 odd percent stake, which is the
Which is
Tatas
Tata
themselves.
Trust.
Yes.
Right. So you reckon what is likely to happen is the transfer of SP's equity, the 18% odd that the family holds, to other financial investors who will now come in. That's the most likely scenario, you think?
Yes. And I would add another adjective to it, friendly financial investors.
Yeah, I think in some ways, I mean, the entire current wrangling indeed is over the Tata's desire to control and protect who gets to own their equity, right? I mean, they don't want their equity to be pledged for the fear that it'll fall into hands that they're not too happy with. And in some sense, that's really what this particular battle is about, right?
Yes, I mean, there were two broad strands. One is, of course, at the core of it is whether the holding company, which is Tata Sons, is a quasi partnership between Tata Group and the 154-year-old Shapoorji-Pallonji Group, which is now run by Shapur Mistry, Cyrus Mistry's elder brother. If it's a partnership, then the Mistries were arguing that their minority rights were getting suppressed. Now, if it isn't, then he was just a professional CEO in a Tata enterprise, and the board was well within its right to fire him for non performance. Now, if we rewind the clock back to October of 2016, the boardroom coup against Mistry, you know, what was the issue all about then? Shortly after he was terminated, Mistry lashed out at Ratan Tata and the Tata Group for allegedly compromising its finances to basically burnish the legacy of Ratan Tata, whom he had accused of backseat driving, oppressive interference. And Mistry was candid to say he was given his walking papers or the boot for calling attention to the legacy hotspots, which included the world's cheapest car, which had flopped despite Ratan Tata's very strong backing for the project. Now, there were several such legacy hotspots that he talked about, Tata Nano being one, the entry into aviation. Steel was another legacy hotspot. I recall telecom, of course, was one, and Divina can throw some more light on that. The Tatas, on the other hand, said, look, we were very disappointed with Mistry's vision for the future. But truth be told, the finances even now are far from strong, as I just said, that the group has $41 billion of debt. That's not a small number and growing, right? And also at that point in time, the Tatas, what was left unsaid is, but there were enough hints, is the fact that Mistry, it was alleged by the Tatas, was trying to radically change the charter of the group, its articles of association, and literally take control of the Tata Trusts, which in turn controls Tata Sons. So that was, left unsaid, but that apparently was the final trigger for the Tatas to go for the nuclear option and just sack an sitting executive chairman.
So, all said and done, what we're looking at now is an unprecedented situation in some ways. I mean, it will fundamentally change the character of, this long-standing character involving just two major shareholders. We are looking at perhaps several different disparate interests, global interests coming in as shareholders into Tata Sons, yes?
Likely, yes.
Likely. Can we talk a little bit about the position of the current executive chairman, Mr. N. Chandrasekharan? As you very correctly pointed out, a lot of business difficulties across the group, very few performing and cash generating companies. How does this particular battle and the need to resolve this particular issue, how does it make his job even more unenviable?
Well, he's Natarajan Chandrasekharan, or Chandra, as everyone calls him, is a very non-controversial technocrat, a Tata lifer, as far as I recall. He's a marathon man, as they call him. So, it's all about endurance and doing it, planning, pacing it all out, just like a marathon runner would. But clock's ticking. He's more or less done 50% of his tenure, and the headwinds do continue. He started with a bang, no doubt about that. He got rid of telecom, which was literally hemorrhaging the group for a long time. He did some hard negotiations and, was very, very close actually merging the steel business with Germany's ThyssenKrupp to create a behemoth. That didn't go through, and that was a big blow. Brexit, then the pandemic, geopolitics, and the tension between China and the rest of the world has impacted Jaguar Land Rover, which had seen a phenomenal success thanks to the love and passion for luxury brands among the Chinese. We all know China is the largest luxury market, and it's not Europe, and it's certainly not France. And but that's also taken a hit. So he's been, I would say, largely status quo. It's not easy to manage, but he most certainly would want this behind him so that he can really move on, do what it
Right.
needs to be done. I
Right.
think he wants to do it, but he wants this genie off his back for sure.
Right. I think I want to ask you one of the things that I think a lot of people probably want to know, and I'm sure there's no definitive answer, but I would love to get your sense. What's your sense of the ties between Mr. Chandrasekharan and Ratan Tata?
I would say cordial. I would say cordial. I would say it's like any, you know, we have good days and bad, right? In our newsroom, we believe very strongly in our story, and our editors don't. So there's that sense of hurt, sense of anguish, but we move on, right? So similarly, Ratan Tata is very fond of Chandra, no doubt, because Chandra has delivered extremely well in TCS. Um,
Absolutely.
and so this, mind you, is a battle between Tata family, or rather
Sure.
Ratan Tata, and
Yeah.
Cyrus Mistry. So,
Yeah.
and Chandra has tough job to manage, balance egos, run a company as complex as the Tata Group. It's not simple at all. It's, as I said, 100+ companies.
Thank you so much for joining us, Arijit and Devina. Quite an interesting story to look out for over the next few days.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
With that, we have come to the end of today's episode. Please write to us with questions or feedback at themorningbrief@timesgroup.com. This is Shrudhijit from the Economic Times. I hope you have a nice day ahead.
Avaz.com